Welcome to this session of the Beyond the Veil Summit, where we'll explore the nature of the veil between the worlds. I'm Lisa Bunnies, your host, and my guest for this session is Dr. Julie Beischel. Our topic today is Love Beyond the Veil, Scientific Evidence. Julie Beischel, PhD, is co-founder and director of research at the Windbridge Research Center, a public charity dedicated to easing suffering around dying, death, and what comes next. Her main research interests include exploring the continuation of loving relationships after death. Dr. Beischel, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Welcome.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I can't wait to hear. Let's start out with the foundational question. What brought you to this fascinating work?
That is always the first question that people ask me. And I do tell the story in great detail in my new book, Love and the Afterlife. But the short version is when I was in graduate school, I lost my mother to suicide. And I was raised Catholic. I didn't know there was like mention of heaven, but I don't really know what that was. And I'd never heard of a medium or I didn't know anything about psychic capabilities at all. But now there was a person who had died in my life. And so I started looking, what does science have to say about what happens after we die? And there was some, but not a lot. And I got a reading from a local psychic medium, and I was very taken aback by how normal it seemed. Like she was my age, and she didn't have beads and crystal ball, and she was just a normal mom, and she was talking to my mom. And so I walked out of there thinking like that was really something that I didn't expect and something that's never happened to me. And so I went back to grad school and I told the other students and my professors that I'd had this crazy experience over the weekend. And as good scientists, most of them said, I don't know anything about that, but it sounds like you had a remarkable experience. But there was one guy, and he was like, nah, you got duped. Those are all con artists. And I was like, no, I was there. I collected the data. And then I realized that's a really common reaction to that. And so I was like, these people need a scientist to stand up for them and bring this into the lab and test it. And the universe like kicked me in the backside, like, okay, that's what you're going to do with your life now. And so just a lot of synchronicities later. I've been doing this for 20 years now.
Wow, that is a long time. So are you finding then that, is this the main reason that people are reluctant to talk about after-death communication experiences? Are there other reasons?
Yeah, people are really reluctant. So what a medium experiences is called after-death communication. And when you go to a medium and get a reading, we call that an assisted after-death communication because you're not experiencing it. She is, but she's sharing it with you. So she's assisting you. But lots of people have spontaneous after-death communication experiences. It's very, very common. The literature, the scientific literature says about 30%, but the theory is that is way underestimated because people are hesitant to talk about it, especially to authority figures like scientists and doctors and therapists and clergy. And so we don't really know how common it is, but we do know that it is a common experience that just seems to be part of grieving.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you find then that people who face the type of reaction that you're talking about, the skepticism, the poo-pooing, do they then tend to doubt their own experience, or do you think that makes them believe more strongly that, no, I know this happened?
That is a really good question. I think both things happen, but through research, interviewing people that have had these kind of experiences, the theory is when people have an experience that they view as negative, it's because they didn't understand it when it happened, and so it might have been frightening, or the reaction that they got from the people that they told it to made them second guess if it was true and real. But then on the other side, yes, that skepticism does make people go, no, I was there. It was real. It was realer than real. And I know that my person was with me, and I know that it happened. So either thing can happen.
All right. Well, then, in your research and your experience over 2 decades, what have you learned about whether it's possible scientifically to prove that consciousness survives the physical death of the brain and the body?
Well, I will caution you on your language there, because scientists don't prove anything. We just collect data and make conclusions. So I got to be careful to say that. But there's two ways to think about the relationship between consciousness or mind and the brain. And so one theory is that the brain makes consciousness. So the chemistry, the biology, something, no one can explain how this could even happen, but somehow this meat bag in your skull, this fat bag inside your skull, it makes consciousness. And so that theory is called scientific materialism. It's entirely physical material that makes consciousness. And then the other theory is that the brain doesn't make consciousness, but it acts like an antenna. So like the signal, like a radio signal exists separate from the antenna, consciousness exists separate from the brain, and the brain just interprets it or channels it or translates it. So when the brain and the body die, just like if you broke the radio, the signal is still there. So consciousness can exist past the death of the brain and the body, because the brain wasn't making consciousness, it just was sort of housing it or facilitating it. And so when the brain dies, it's perfectly understandable that consciousness can continue to exist. And there's lots of data that cannot be explained by materialism, but that fit well within that the other explanation, which views consciousness as what's called non-local. It's not localized to the brain, it's expansive, right? All kinds of psychic ability research shows that consciousness can access information and have effects across large distances, across time, backwards and forwards in time. So people might have heard stories about mothers who are aware that like their child got in a car accident all the way across the country. So if the brain was making consciousness and it was trapped in here, how could she possibly know that? But if consciousness is expansive and it has access to information across space and time, then she could know across the country that something happened to someone that she loves. So there's a lot of evidence that materialism doesn't have all the answers, is not the right explanation among the living, but then also we call them planks in the survival platform. So survival of consciousness after death. There's lots of experiences and phenomena that support that. So mediumship, right? They're talking to survived consciousnesses of deceased people, near-death experiences, reincarnation, apparition, all these kind of experiences support this idea that consciousness is non-local, and when the brain dies, it just continues to exist separate from the brain.
Now, I don't know if you can even answer this question, but it's coming to mind. Where is consciousness? Where does it live? Or is that a limited question coming from a human being who can't comprehend what the answer might be?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put that. Yeah, that's a materialist question, right? So materialism is the dominant scientific paradigm. It's what's taught in medical schools. This is why this stuff cannot be widely accepted, because it doesn't make sense with the way that we think the world works. But yeah, that happens. When we learn new things, we have to get new theories. We have to expand our way that we understand things. So it isn't aware. There isn't a where consciousness happens, because it's so expansive. It's not located, especially not in the brain, and not in any geographical location. It's actually only with the constant feedback that we get. Oh, when I say move my hand, then it moves. And so the fact like that, we get all this feedback from the body that like, this is where I am, that me is right here. There's all kinds of sensory, even sound localizes us into the body, but experimentally, it's really easy to disrupt. There's a lot of experimental protocols where you can like, it's very complex, but it's like they take a rubber hand and then they put it above the table and you put your hand under the table and then they run a paintbrush on the rubber hand the same time somebody's doing that to your own hand. And really quick, your brain goes, oh yeah, that's my hand. And it will associate, oh, this is my hand now. And when someone hits it with a hammer, you have an adrenaline response and you're like, that's my hand. And the same thing can happen. They put VR goggles on people and then there's like a camera somewhere else. And very easily your brain goes, oh yeah, we're over there now. Okay. And so we think like, oh, it's very clear that this is where I am, but it's really easy to disrupt. So I wrote an article called, you're not even in there now. Like we think like, how could I possibly exist after? Well, you're not even in there now. Our cells are turning over all the time. Half of us is bacteria, right? Like this thing that we go, oh no, I am the body. You're really not. The mind, the consciousness is what you are. And that's the thing that can continue to live after the death of the brain and the body. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So interesting. Then again, here's another question. I have no idea if you can answer this or not,
Sure.
but if there is no physicality, that's sort of a collecting point for our energy system, our individual consciousness, without a physical collecting point, how then does sort of a bag of consciousness that my mother, who's on the other side of the veil, how does her collected consciousness of her lifetimes, her experience, how does it all stay in one place? Or again, is that just a human construct of trying to make sense of what this all looks like? Do you have any idea?
I think it is us trying to make sense of something that's probably we're not even able to make sense of it. But I think that we are limited in like, well, I know I am separate from my mother, right? And when I talk to her, and so when she's not, like you said, collected in this body, then how can she stay collected? But lots of the ancient world traditions think of it like we have a spirit self and we have a physical self, we have an energetic self. So there's lots of ways that people who aren't modern Western black and white thinkers could easily conceive of these kind of things. So I think just our own sort of psychology and worldviews of modern Western thinkers is that it just doesn't make sense. So it seems like, well, this couldn't possibly be real, but we just don't have the right mental and psychological tools to really contemplate it. But it's happening. So whether we understand it or not, I don't understand quantum physics, but it's real. So we have to follow the data.
Right. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to ask these these possibly impossible to answer questions. Let me get back to your specific work. You've been studying people's loving relationships with the departed during laboratory readings with psych mediums. Why did you choose that specifically?
Well, I had that personal experience. And so that's, the first step in the scientific method is make an observation. So I observed that this was something, I observed for myself that this was something, but there's a lot of alternative explanations for what can be happening in a positive mediumship reading. There's cold reading, where she's just reading cues from you. Hot reading, she looked it up before you got there. So when we bring it into the lab, our protocol is quintuple blind, we call it. It has 5 levels of blinding. So it's very complex, but the bottom line is it controls for all those things. So the sitter and the medium have no contact with each other. It's just me and a medium on the phone. I don't know anything about the absent sitter. I asked the medium specific questions, so she can't just say general things. And so that controls for all those explanations that skeptics will throw out, oh, they're just doing this. And so that data is published in peer-reviewed journal, and it's strong. It's statistically significant. They are reporting specific and accurate information about specific deceased people that they couldn't have acquired through any normal means.
So from what I understand about your work, that you found that love specifically seems to be, I guess, sort of a universal force that keeps us connected. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's so interesting. We did a study where we took 10 of the mediums on my team, so they're pre-screened, pre-tested mediums, and they participated in 2 readings. They did a reading for a deceased person and a reading for a living person, and they didn't know which was which. They didn't even know there was going to be one of each. And then after each reading, they filled out a standardized questionnaire that quantifies 26 different elements of the medium's consciousness. And so what we found when we analyzed that data was that the only thing that was different, right? They're doing a psychic reading for a living person and a psychic reading where they're communicating with the deceased. So if they're going to be really similar experiences because they both are accessing this non-sensory type of information. So we expected to see a lot of similarities, and we saw them. But the one difference in the 26 dimensions, the one difference was that there was statistically significantly higher levels of love when they were getting the information about a deceased target than when they got it for a living target. So again, not knowing which was which. So when they tuned in, we said, I asked, describe the physical appearance, what is the personality? When I asked them just these questions and they tuned in and they got the information from the deceased person, they experienced more love than when they were just doing a psychic reading for a living person. So that connection, the love that those deceased people felt for their living loved ones, even though the living loved ones weren't part of the reading, right? It's such a strong connection that even in these blinded conditions, in the lab, in an experiment, the love is so strong, the medium can feel it. I just thought that was so incredible.
Yeah, that really is. That's very interesting. Now, I'm wondering then, if somebody is wishing to stay connected with their departed loved one, somebody who they genuinely loved, but their grief is, I think, maybe more overpowering than the feeling of just bright, shiny love. Can that get in the way, or is that not an issue?
First of all, I'm not a clinician. I'm a laboratory scientist. So if people are experiencing something and they're looking for a treatment for their grief, I would suggest they see a qualified healthcare professional. I can't speak to that specifically, but I can answer your question in that it is possible for people to stay connected with their loved ones, have their own experiences. And I think the big thing that you can do is don't be so skeptical. It can happen. It happens all the time. People all over the world in every culture since the beginning of time, people have experienced their deceased loved ones. And I think the thing that people need to keep in mind, one of our mediums says, you're looking for fireworks when you should be looking for fireflies, right? It's not going to be, right? It doesn't have to be so overpowering. It's going to be something that has happened to other people. They're going to be common, normal things, because your deceased person can't oh, I added an element to the periodic table to show you no, they can't do impossible things. Like, they're not going to make a new species of toad in your backyard. It's going to be fireflies. It's going to be butterflies. It's going to be license plates. It's going to be songs on the radio. It's going to be a big experience, spontaneous experience people have is just called sense of presence. So just like the feeling that they are there with you. And so people are, especially in our modern skeptical society, they're really apt to go, that's just a coincidence. And then when you tell people, then the people will say it's just a coincidence. But your person really tried to have a moment with you. So it's very important that you recognize it and that you express gratitude, even if it's only in your own mind, that has happened, because the demonstration of what's called continuing bonds. So it's the bond that you had when the person was alive continues, it's just in a different form. And the demonstration of continuing bonds does alleviate symptoms of grief. It's one of the only things that consistently has been shown to alleviate the symptoms of grief. So recognizing that your bond continues is one of the most important things that you can do, and not discounting things that are happening to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That if you can recognize that you're still conversing with them, they're not really gone. I can see how that can sort of help to alleviate grief. Slowly, gradually. Everybody's obvious experience is different. I'm wondering then. So people who are listening to this and would like to stay connected with their departed loved ones, do you have any hints or tips or suggestions?
I really want to help people, because that is a big question that we get asked. And so I think the thing that I've done that helps society the best, I developed a deck of meditation type cards. And so it employs the power of randomness, right? Again, we have to remember that the deceased have to do things that are possible and normal. And one of the ways that they can affect change in our lives is through randomness, right? We have to give them a system that, like, a lot of different things are possible, and then they can impact it. There's a lot of evidence that living human consciousness can affect random processes. So makes sense that a consciousness that's not trapped in the body anymore can do the same thing. So when you shuffle the cards, they can help you pick the one that you need to hear about today, that you need to read. So some of the cards in my deck, which comes out in the spring of 2023, some of the cards are signs. So it says, like, today I will be open to observing a insect, and I will experience it as a sign from my loved one. And I'm quick to caution people, the butterfly is not your deceased person. The fact that you experienced it, your experience is the sign. The butterfly is not the sign, because a bird could come by and eat the butterfly, because that's what nature does. And that's going to be very traumatic for you if you see that happen. So remember that it's your experience that's the sign. So for example, one of the cards says, I will be open to a meaningful plant or flower as it's a sign from my loved one. And so one woman who had been using these cards, she picked that card, and that day she was in the grocery store, and she was standing in front of the flowers, the flower arrangement, and one of the arrangements fell onto the ground. And the lady sitting next to her said, I guess that one's for you. And so that was her sign. Like, that's pretty, so that's a pretty dramatic sign, and they're not always going to be like that. But so this way with these cards, it allows you, like, you can't just look, we have a lot of stimulus in our lives. So you can't just look, oh, there's too many things. Well, here's a card, and it says, today I'm going to look for this. And then you and your, I call them DLOs, your departed loved one. So you and your DLO are now, like, in a conversation about, I'm going to look for this, you try and show it to me, and then I'll know that you're still part of it. And again, that demonstrates a continuing bond, and that alleviates symptoms of grief.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yesterday, I just happened to look up when a butterfly was floating overhead. And I'm glad you clarified that's not them inside the physicalness of the butterfly. But I mean, I wondered, okay, well, who's that a message from? So it's not that the butterfly was put there specifically for me to see. It's the fact that I just happened to look up at that time.
I think it's that this scares people, but I think it's that your DLO, your departed loved one, inspires you to look up. Like, hey, look over here. And that scares people because they're like, are they controlling my thoughts? No, that's not what it is. It's just a little nudge, right? That allows you to see a thing that was going to be there anyway. Again, because it's your experience, that's the sign.
Right.
Yeah, the butterfly has a fulfilling life all on its own. Like, don't take that, let it be part of nature as it is. But you observing it and noticing it, that's the sign.
Okay. Well, let me bring up another example. Again, no idea if you can answer this or not, so we'll give this a try. I mentioned this in another session that after my dad's really good at showing us signs. And one day I was in the car and a car with a license plate that said Ed's Love. My dad's name was Ed, just happened to pull right in front of our car. Butterflies fly by all the time. A license plate that says Ed's Love, that's really specific and pretty unique. I mean, you can't have more than one in a state that says that. So the odds of that specific car pulling in front of me specifically when I was asking for a sign from Dad, do you have any idea what are the odds? How does that work out?
Yeah, people want that to be calculated, right? Well, how many license plates and how many do you see? Like, you're never going to get there. You're never going to be able to figure that out. So I just like to think about, there's mystery in the universe. And I think that's part of human experience is exploring mystery and recognizing that mystery is a part of our lives and just thinking like, wow, did your dad inspire that guy to get that license plate? Did he inspire him to turn left that day? Did he inspire you to turn right that day? We don't know. We don't know how any of this works. So we just need to appreciate it. Thank your dad when it happens. Like, I see it. Great job. That's amazing. And just know that your bond continues. That's the end point, right? We don't have to explain all this. There's lots of things we don't understand in the world. We don't know why we yawn, right? There's really common things that scientists can't explain, a lot of them. And so, like, my training is in pharmacology, so I know about drugs. And there are a lot of drugs on the market that if you look it up, the mechanism of action, how does this drug work? It will say mechanism of action is unknown. Like, they sell a lot of drugs that we don't know how they work, but they work. So we keep selling them and we keep taking them. And so there's a lot of things we don't have to understand how it works for it to be real. So stop trying to understand it, because you're going to frustrate your DLO. You're going to frustrate yourself. Just be grateful that you got to experience such a mysterious, amazing thing.
Yeah. Well, that's very well stated. And I appreciate the comparison to, we don't know why prescription drugs work either. I think that's very, very helpful. Now, I wonder then, what about pets? Can our non-human animal loved ones communicate across the veil?
Oh, definitely. I mean, they're just a consciousness too, right? So just because they don't have the same apparatus that we do, even Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, he said the soul is the same in all living creatures, though the form is different, something like that. And so there's a lot of evidence, like animals come through in mediumship readings. They're there to greet people when they have a near-death experience. So it's very common for them to be in the afterlife. And we can still have a relationship with them, just like you can still have a relationship with your human DLO. So one of the things that I recommend, I call them co-created crafts. So crafting and art is an important part of the human experience. And you don't have to be good at it. It doesn't have to be good art to get the benefits from it. So co-created crafts employs the power of randomness to make something with your DLO. So it can be as simple as, like, you have a bunch of colored pencils and a coloring book page, and you put your hand in the pencils and you say, inspire me to pick the right one, and then you and the inspiration from your DLO, you color the picture together. You chose the pictures, you chose the colors to color the picture. Now you have a thing that you made together. And I feel like you can do the same thing with your animals. When you have a treat and pick the hand, right? So you let your dog, your deceased departed loved one dog, pick the yellow pencil or the red pencil, and then you color the picture through that way. It's doing things where you're recognizing and you're telling them, I recognize that you are still here and we can still do the things, go on a walk and take the dog with you. We're going to go on a walk together. And it's all the same sorts of things, but animals show up in all the same sorts of spontaneous after-death communication. Dreams is a big one, and a lot of people have dream experiences with their departed animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that it's fun and playful, not real heavy. But while we're talking about receiving the messages, et cetera, when you were talking about the deck that will be coming out, it came to mind that there have been times when I've asked for, show me something, I need to hear from you, and nothing comes. Is that because I'm blocking it, or what would cause the messages to not come through?
We don't really know. That does happen. And so, this is all very mysterious. So, we don't know what it's like there. When I would say, give your person time to get settled, right? We don't know. Are there orientation classes? We don't know how anything works. So don't expect it right away. And, we don't know if they're busy. There are probably other people that love that person. Maybe they really needed to hear from them right then. And we don't know, can they not be in two places at once? We don't know how any of that works. But there does seem to be, I have a Kindle book where it's called From the Mouths of Mediums. And I asked the mediums, how do they experience communication, and how do they recommend people who aren't mediums experience communication? And then if people haven't experienced it, why might that be? And they did have a list of things that, like, if you're grieving, too hard kind of thing, it can be, it can prevent that sort of thing. If you're asking for it too often, there's a lot of different ways. So we don't know how it works, and not everything works every time, right? A really good batting average is 300, right? That's 30% of the time you got a hit. Like, that's not very good, but we find it very impressive. So things do not work 100% of the time, and we have to recognize that. Especially, what I know the most about is mediumship readings, and people are very sullied from what they've seen on TV, because the mediums on TV are heavily edited. They only show you the hits, and then they get a reading, and it's not like that at all, because that's not how mediumship works. And then they get really frustrated. And now their DLO came and tried to talk to them, and now they're just they don't think it happened. And I think that's such a disservice. So I have a big section in my new book, Love in the Afterlife, about what people can do, because there's 3 people participating in a reading. The medium's only one of them. You have to do your job as we call it the sitter, the living person getting the reading. You have to do your job as the sitter as well. And that's getting rid of all your assumptions. And in the book there, I talk about things you can do before, during, and after the reading. It's not just like, oh, let's go watch a movie. No, this is a thing you're going to go and experience something with your departed loved one. Like, this is a big deal. Don't take it lightly. Like, do your job, do the pieces that you need to do. And my new theory that I'm really interested in is we've done a lot of research where we surveyed mediums, and we surveyed 1,000 non-mediums and over 300 mediums, and some of the differences we saw, the groups were demographically matched. It was mostly white women over 40. That's who filled out our questionnaire. And we did see statistically significant differences in personality traits. So the mediums were lower in neuroticism, higher in agreeableness, conscientiousness, and compassion. So my theory is when you read descriptions of what the afterlife is like from near-death experiencers, for example, it's all love. Like they're in a place of love, and it's acceptance and compassion. And I can't imagine it's easy for the people that live there to try and come here where it's terrible and awful and try and communicate with us. So my theory is the more that you incorporate compassion, agreeableness, conscientiousness into your life and love, that's going to make that connection so much easier to create. That's the premise of my new book.
That, again, fascinating. I hate to keep repeating myself using the same words, but fascinating. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, you've mentioned your book and that you've got this card deck coming up. I want to make sure that I mention your website so people can find that. Well, you've got two, actually. One is juliebphd.com and the other one is windbridge.org. What's the difference between those two sites?
So thank you for asking. juliebphd.com is my personal website. So if you would like to join the email list there, then I can tell you when the cards come out, when the book comes out, that sort of thing. Windbridge.org is the website of the Windbridge Research Center, where I'm director of research, and that's a charity dedicated to alleviating suffering around dying, death, and what comes next. And so we do that through research and the creation of free educational materials. So at windbridge.org, you can have access to all our research findings, and there we have a lot of like printable PDF fact sheets, and there's all kinds of things where as a charity we want to offer free educational materials. There's lots of videos and that sort of thing. So Julie B. PhD, we took the findings from the center and we sort of made it more lay friendly. And so you can sort of get, it's a better sort of snapshot idea. If you really want to dig into the peer-reviewed journal articles, then those are on the center site at windbridge.org. But if you just want a sort of overview of what we found, then that's on juliebphd.com. And I encourage everybody to join both email lists. You'll get different things. And we're very cautious. We do not send out a lot of emails, and you can unsubscribe whenever you want. So I encourage people to join those email lists at juliebphd.com and windbridge.org.
Right. Perfect. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Beischel. This has been a really, again, fascinating conversation. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to make sure that we talk about before we go, or do you feel like we've covered it all?
Oh, we covered so much cool stuff. I think you asked such good questions. And I think we covered a lot of it. Let us recap. Your DLO is still with you. Recognizing that they're there and they can still participate in your life will help alleviate the symptoms of grief. And trying to be more loving and compassionate probably will make that connection easier to form.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very important point. Thank you again, Dr. Beischel. This has been a delight to spend time with you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I want to remind everyone I've been talking with Dr. Julie Beischel, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Beyond the Veil Summit.